Outstanding. Thank you for reminding me about that. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the agenda. All right. So what we're going to be covering today, we're going to be going through and talking to everybody about WCAG, kind of explaining what it is about, how it impacts you, your website, your customers' websites, what it means for your business, how it works. Five Star is going to be going through a case study to be able to provide you with an example of some of the work that's been done with WCAG compliance and improvements. We are going to have a Q&A period at the end. We do have an open chat, so if anyone has any questions, please post those in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat and making sure that we address those questions during the Q&A period at the end. And we do have some contact information at the end. So if there's anyone that thinks of something later on and you want something clarified, or if you have a question, please follow up with me, and we'll make sure that we get you the information as quickly as possible. This presentation today is being recorded, and we're going to be sending everyone a recap with notes, so you can take a look at that. And also we will send you a link to the recording so you can take a look at the recording at your convenience at a later date. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the speakers. I would like to introduce you to the speakers today. We have Dana Randall from Level Access and Nick Ackrum from Five Star Development. Just a quick little introduction bio for each one of the speakers. So Dana Randall is an award-winning creative director and former global head of digital innovation at Tapestry, which was a parent company of Coach, Kate Spade, and Stuart Weitzman. She has more than 20 years of experience as an interface designer with a focus on emerging technology. Sharing her experience with her own disability, Dana often speaks on disability inclusion, invisible disabilities, and inclusive design. So we're very grateful that Dana is spending some time with us today, and we're grateful that she's a speaker. Nick Ackrum, who's a speaker as well, has a dual degree in background administration and information systems from Drexel University. Nick brings over 2 decades of experience in IT project management to the table. And for the past 6 years, he served as manager of the project management office here at Five Star Development, where he continues to spearhead initiatives and drive innovation and foster growth. So again, Nick, we're very grateful for the time today, and thank you for putting together a great presentation for us as well. All right, Dana, I'll hand it over to you, and you can go ahead and get started with your presentation.
Great, thanks so much. And just one quick reminder for anyone, if you are using the chat or Q&A, I'm not going to see it while I'm presenting, but I will be sure to take a look at it after I stop sharing my screen. So I'm not ignoring you. Just know I've got a couple of things going on the screen at once, so I'm not seeing it. So to get started, I want to talk a little bit about WCAG, or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Now, to start with that, what is WCAG? Well, WCAG is an acronym for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and it's published by the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium. Say that a couple times fast. It's a bit of a tongue twister. And basically, these guidelines are the consensus for standards around digital accessibility. And when you see WCAG guidelines, you'll often see different conformance levels referred to. So the first conformance level is level A. And level A is really the easiest level, and it provides limited accessibility. It is important to note that level A conformance is generally not considered sufficient to meet the ADA requirements, but it's a good place to start. And then double A is really the recommended level of conformance for web content. And that means websites, apps, or any sort of digital property, including things like digital kiosks or anything that basically lives on a screen. And double A is really the standard for most businesses, including government entities. Now, AAA is the highest level of conformance, and AAA is very difficult to achieve, not impossible, but it is definitely challenging. And we tend to see that AAA is something where organizations who might be serving the disability community, or specifically the elderly community, may strive for AAA compliance. But to know that AAA is a great goal, but is challenging to meet. As a business, you'll also see something when you see WCAG conformance levels, you might see 2.0, 2.1, 2.2. And so those are the different versions of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. We are currently in version 2.2. But what you'll notice is that a lot of businesses are currently conforming to WCAG 2.1 AA. Now, within these guidelines, there are different principles, and the different guidelines and then the success criteria that live within them map back to these 4 principles. And I want to explain these principles in a way that I feel like is a little bit more, honestly, accessible. So the first principle is called perceivable. And when I think about perceivable, what you want to think about there is the senses. Now on the screen, I'm showing an ear icon representing hearing, an icon for smell, taste, touch, and sight. I do have the smell and the taste icons kind of muted back slightly. And the reason is that when we're talking about digital accessibility, we don't usually have smell-o-vision or taste-o-vision. So those are not really senses that we're going to rely on. But we can rely, obviously, on hearing and sound. Those are things like video, today's presentation, and then sight is what we would consider the typical experience. Now, if you're thinking like, well, how does someone who is blind use a website? We're going to get into that. But when we think about the perceivable principle, what you're looking for here is that the content must be available to a user via hearing, sight, or touch. So that means if the content is not available to that person through sight because they have a visual impairment, they're maybe low vision or they're blind, that they're able to receive that information through an alternative input or an alternative method, which in many cases or in most cases would be hearing. Now, you might wonder, well, where does touch come into play? Now, touch is an interesting one because touch is something where you might be more familiar with if you have something like, an Apple Watch, or if maybe you're a gamer or you have a kid that's a gamer, where the gaming controls provide haptic feedback and there's like a shaking or like a vibration. And that's an example of how touch might be implemented, as well as some assistive technology devices, which I'll get to in a minute. So the next principle around accessibility is called operable. And operable basically means the functionality. And when we're talking about the functionality, that means that your website or app or digital experience can work through and function using multiple different methods for interaction devices. So that can include a mouse, a trackpad, a touch screen, a keyboard, a joystick or a controller, maybe something like a stylus, or in some cases, things like motion tracking. Now, don't worry, this doesn't mean that you have to build motion tracking into your website or property, but know that there are users that leverage assistive technology that might be using something like eye tracking or head tracking, and I'm moving my head around to navigate a website in place of the typical experience that we probably think about, which would be a mouse or a trackpad. And so the operable principle is just to ensure that regardless of what type of device you're using to interact, that the experience is functional with it, regardless of the input device. Now, the next principle of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines is understandable. So this is really about the ability to comprehend the information, as well as some guidance around predictable interactions and clear labels or instructions. So I'm demonstrating this on the screen with icons representing logical. This also includes things like the reading level, and so the type of language that's used. And then you get more of the instructional side of it and the labeling side of it, which falls under understandable, and that applies to things like labels. So you can think about things like labels on text fields, and then instruction, meaning if something requires some instructions or guidance on how to use it because it might not be as intuitive, that those instructions are available. And now the next principle is, in my opinion, has the worst name. It's not as obvious, but it's referred to as robust. And I like to think of this one as the technology. Now, I had mentioned earlier assistive technology, and robust is really about that the product must work with a variety of assistive technologies, browsers, and devices. So I think when you're thinking about websites and apps, we're probably familiar with browser compatibility. You may be testing your app in Safari and Chrome and Firefox and different browsers. And the same principles then apply to different assistive technologies that users with disabilities might use. And that can include things like braille displays, voice input, screen magnification, screen readers, switch devices, and things like joysticks and different types of controllers. Now, again, it is not that there are things that you need to do to your website to ensure that they function with these add-on technologies, but it is usually the user that is introducing this technology. So if someone is a screen reader user, they use a screen reader user across all of the websites they visit and all the different software interfaces on their laptop or on their phone. So the best way to remember these 4 principles is the POUR acronym, which stands for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So with that, I want to touch on what are some very common accessibility barriers that we see on websites. And these barriers can prevent users with disabilities from accessing or interacting with a website. And some of the examples of these can be things like lack of alt text for images, inadequate keyboard navigation. So keeping in mind that not every user uses a mouse or a trackpad. So the ability to tab and arrow through a website is very important. Poor color contrast is something we unfortunately see a lot of. Non-descriptive link text. So that usually applies more towards users with screen readers, that there might be a text link and there is not an adequate label explaining what that link is and where it goes. A lack of captioning or transcripts for audio and video content. And you might notice on the screen today, at the bottom of this presentation, we have some live captioning included. So this includes if you're embedding any kind of video content on your website, you want to make sure that there are captions available. And then this one is a little bit different, but complex or inconsistent navigation. So I like to think about this as like maybe moving from section to section on a website, but the navigation changes based on the section. That might provide challenges with users with cognitive disabilities who may kind of struggle to understand how to navigate the site. Another one that's related to cognitive disabilities, as well as some users with that are leveraging assistive technologies, is time-limited content or interactions. And then last but not least, the use of jargon or complex language, which applies to the understandability of your website or app. So I want to talk a little bit about 2 different customer or user personas. The first persona, this person's disability is vision, and they are a user of assistive technology. Now, I'm sharing on the screen some do's and don'ts, and I'm not going to read through all of these, but just to understand that there's guidance. I personally am a designer, so there are things that I want to think about when I'm designing a website or app around the layout, that the layout is clear and it's not cluttered, and that content is not spread all over the screen. But there are accessibility guidelines, do's and don'ts that go beyond things that you visually see, but also include the way the site is built and coded. So on the screen, these are just a couple examples of sort of some do's and don'ts for screen readers. Like do provide meaningful and descriptive alt text, as well as alternative like captions and things for videos. Don't rely on information only via image or video. Now, the next persona is an example of someone whose disability is a motor disability. And what I mean by that is someone who may have perhaps something like arthritis, or they may have some type of paralysis, or general weakness of the extremities. And in this case, this user is a keyboard only user. So on the screen, I have more examples of do's and don'ts related to designing and building products for people with physical or motor disabilities. And I'm going to call out the first one. The first example says, do make large clickable actions. And then it's showing different types of interactive elements that you might see on a website, like a hamburger menu, or a radio button for a form field, or perhaps a button that says click me. And on the do example, there's a light outline kind of demonstrating that that entire area is clickable. But on the don't, there's a light outline that shows that just the little circle of the radio button is clickable, or just the arrow is clickable. And that is not as functional for someone that might have a physical or motor disability where they have less dexterity. So this is an example of the type of decisions that you want to make when you're designing and building websites and apps to ensure that you are thinking about the needs of this particular type of user. So I wanted to show a little bit of some examples of before and afters. And the first one I had mentioned earlier was low color contrast. So on the top, we have an example of some brand colors that are blues and greens. And the background color is then paired with a corresponding text color. Now, the top row says before accessibility modifications. And what you might notice is that some of the text is a little bit challenging to read. I think the one that really stands out to me is probably the far right side, where there's a kind of mid-tone blue background with a mid-tone green A text in the middle. That does not have sufficient color contrast. So this is a great example where you don't necessarily have to change your brand colors, but you do want to put some guidelines in place to ensure that your background colors and text pairings do meet the contrast minimum guidelines. And then the bottom example is showing that in practice. So you're still having greens and blues as the colors, but you may have a little bit of a darker green or a little bit of a darker blue to provide the sufficient contrast. Now, here's another example, which is a layout before and after. And on the left example, there is a background image, and then it's very difficult to see, but there's a header within that says blog, and then there's a text block underneath it. You may have missed that it even said blog in that picture. It really gets lost. And then on the right example, there's still a background image, but it has like a dark overlay, and then that provides sufficient contrast for the word blog, so the blog heading can be legible. And that's another example of some adjustments to layouts where the visibility of the content is being impacted, and then that's an example of how to resolve it. Now, here's another example around alt text, and I'm going to try to explain this because there's a lot of information on the screen. So I've got, there's some guidelines around alt text being unclear, but also avoiding redundant alt text. So in the first example, I have 4 pictures of a very cute dog wearing, looks like a hoodie and maybe some sunglasses. And in the first image, there is the image source, and then there is the actual, like, the name of the image, and it's just like random. It says like dog and then a bunch of numbers, and then alt text is blank. So in this case, it's a fail because there's no alt text. The second example, is something we see a lot, which is sometimes alt text gets auto-populated by whatever content management system you're using. And in this case, the alt text that's being populated is the same as the actual image name, but it's not really meaningful. It says dog and a bunch of numbers. That doesn't really help the user understand what that's an image of. Now, this next example you might think is okay because you have the name, the image name, and then the alt text says meet Boo. But then there's also a caption on that image, and it says caption meet Boo. So that would be actually a fail, because when the person with a screen reader is going over that image, it will announce meet Boo, which is not really descriptive of what the picture is. And then right after that, it'll say caption meet Boo. So the past example is the alt text says cute dog wearing sunglasses, and then the caption says meet Boo. And finally, this is another example of an accessibility fail. Now, I mentioned people sometimes use things like keyboards to navigate. And in the first example, there's not a logical pattern. Well, the first example is a pass. So you'll notice there's street address, city, state, and zip. And then there's annotation numbers that say 1, 2, 3, and 4 in that order. And that's how someone would tab and fill out a form. But in the fail example, we have street address, and then it jumps to the zip code, then it goes back to city, and then it goes to state. And that's not a logical order. And that would be considered a focus order fail for accessibility. So that's some crash course stuff on, demystifying accessibility a little bit for you. And hopefully that makes it feel a little bit less mysterious or intimidating. This is all often very straightforward types of things that you can fix within your website or app. So I want to transition for a moment to talk a little bit about what this might mean for your business. So the first thing to note is that accessibility is important for your business. And I like to think about it through 3 different lenses. First is litigation, mitigating risks of demand letters. There is a reality that if you have a website or app that is not accessible, you may have already received a demand letter at some point. And if you haven't, it's sort of just a matter of time. The next one is around reputation. And this is really avoiding any costly brand defending public relation costs. So now let's say you do receive some kind of complaint from a user with a disability, and that information becomes public knowledge. You're now going to probably need to invest in some PR efforts to resolve some of that reputation management that might be a result of your business being perceived as not being accessible or inclusive to people with disabilities. And last is, I think, one that's often overlooked, which is improved ROI. Over 25 or close to 27% of people have disabilities, especially in the United States. That's roughly the number. So if you think about it through that lens, you may inadvertently be boxing out up to 25% of your users or customers. And that means that if you have an accessible site, more people can access your site and more people can use your site. And that's important for business. Next, I want to update you on some recent changes to the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title II. The Department of Justice has provided some updates, and those updates include the following. So first is WHO. So this means U.S. state, local governments who are being, they've refined the gray area that has come in the Americans with Disabilities Act as it relates to your website or app being considered a place of business. And this now applies to cities, counties, and state organizations and websites, local departments, for example, police departments, public K through 12 education and higher education, and special districts, like, for example, maybe like a water board, something like that. Now, these are all businesses that are going to be required to have accessible websites and apps. as part of the ADA Title II. Now, what is the question? Now, what does this apply to? So this applies to web content and mobile apps and means that you must meet WCAG 2.1. It says A and AA. So basically the requirement is 2.1 AA is the requirement. And this means that any content that is being made available to the public, including most third-party arranged content, and I'll get more into that in a minute, is being held to this requirement. And web content includes any new social media, conventional electronic documents that are not password protected and that are actively used. Now, the when, if you're thinking, if this applies to you and you fall under this category, is it's a rollout plan. So effective April 2026, they'll start to enforce it for the 50K population, and then it'll continue to roll out through April 2027. And you should note that this is likely to be the blueprint that they're going to follow for Title III public accommodation rulemaking. And there are some exceptions here. So the exceptions of things that you don't necessarily have to worry about getting compliant are things like archived content, pre-existing conventional electronic documents, that unless these documents are currently used to apply for anything, to gain access, or to participate in the public entity's services or programs. Any password protected conventional electronic documents are under this exception, as well as content posted by third party. So third-party arranged content that you upload to your site, you are responsible for. If there's content that's being uploaded by a third party that you are not controlling that upload, that is part of the exemption. And also any pre-existing social media content is also exempt. So the last thing I want to touch on before I hand it over to Nick is how we think about accessibility at Level Access and the methodology that we use. And we call that agile accessibility. And what that really is borrowing from agile development, basically meaning recurring, iterative, and ongoing. So on the screen, it says focused projects, meaning we find the most success with our customers that approach accessibility with a level of focus. Like, what are your most trafficked websites and apps? What are the things that are really core to doing business? You may have some random microsite somewhere that no one visits, and that is not necessarily the thing where you should focus your efforts first and foremost. Constant iteration is that this is ongoing. Right? Every time anyone pushes a code update or people push more content to your website, accessibility needs to be considered. And this is also a collaborative effort. Everyone plays a role in the accessibility of your website or your app. And that includes designers, content creators, developers, and so on. And that includes internal teams and external teams like the 5-Star team. And ultimately, when you approach this agile approach, we find that you get rapid improvements. So I said like some instant quick wins, as well as more sustained momentum. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Nick to talk a little bit about how this works.
Great, thanks, Dana. Let me just share my screen real quickly. Great, is everyone able to see how it works?
Yes, and Nick, just so you know, you are off camera, if that was your intention.
Okay, that was not my intention, but I tried to grab that real quick. Perfect, you can see that now? All right,
Yep.
So real quickly, I know that was a ton of information and a ton of great information, so thanks, Dana, for all of that. And initially, it may be a little overwhelming with all the information that we got provided. But what we've done is we've taken the process and kind of broken it down into 5 major steps that we kind of follow here at 5-Star. And let me show you that quickly. So on the screen, you can see there's a workflow. It goes from prepare to conducting the audit, followed by analysis and planning, execution, and finally ongoing monitoring. And we will cover each of these briefly over the next few slides. But if you have any questions in the meantime, please let us know. So the first step in the process is to prepare. So many of you are starting to kind of take that first step today, which is educate yourself on what is WCAG and what does it mean to my organization. So we urge you after this webinar to continue to research and ask questions. Accessibility is not something you kind of do as an afterthought, or you don't do it on a whim. It's something that in order for it to work, it needs to be integrated in the way that you do business. You need to keep in mind your team. You need to keep in mind your customers, what your vision is, and what your brand is when kind of determining what accessibility means to your organization. So I ask you not only to kind of use this as a way of inclusion, but as a way to stand out in your industry and a way to better connect with your clients and even your prospective clients. As a part of preparation, some of the things you need to start thinking about is what level of compliance is best for you. As Danny mentioned, there are multiple levels. 2.1 being kind of the most recent version that is required, but 2.2 is available and 2.3 is in the works. So making sure we understand what level is best for you. We also talked about levels A, AA, and AAA. So you need to start to formulate a plan on what your approach will be and how you plan on reaching that goal. What does your timeline look like? Should we use the phase approach, as Dana mentioned? Some people like to do that because it is iterative and you don't have to try to, eat everything in one bite. You can take small bites as you're working through those. Other organizations, maybe this is a point in time where you're doing a site redesign, and let's just incorporate this as part of the redesign. And maybe we are doing it in one big chunk. So as we're doing the redesign, we want to make sure that we are 2.1 compliant. Everything that we're producing is part of that. As part of the initial release. We also need to think about budget and what it really takes to make that goal a reality. These are all great questions you need to consider before kind of moving on to what that next step is. So the next step is kind of conduct the audit itself, right? So you've got your plan in place, you know what you want to do, you know what your goals are. It provides you a starting point for kind of the next 3 steps in the process. Level Access can actually provide you with a combination of automated testing and manual testing. And what that allows you to do is have a comprehensive view to understand what areas in your site are currently not compliant. They provide you more of a detailed report of the issue. So each issue, you have a detailed list. Inside of that, we'll have what was not in compliance, but it also provides you a very helpful proposed solution or a way that you may be able to become compliant. So not only are you being led into what isn't compliant, where it is on your site, but also a priority of what that is, how important that is in the WCAG standards, as well as what is a possible solution to remedy that issue. So don't be alarmed if that list is kind of large. And I'll talk about a little bit in our case study. A lot of people will get a huge list on that initial report and think like this is way too overwhelming. Don't worry, we're kind of walking through how to handle those. And even some of the best design sites out there have issues when it comes to accessibility. So through the next couple of slides, we'll walk you through how to kind of systematically work through that list and work what's best for you and what can be expected and what cannot be expected. So once you conduct the audit, the next step is kind of around the analyze information. So you have a starting point to start formulating your plan on how to address that list of issues. As we mentioned, the report provides you with a priority. One of the things that we work through 5-Star is obviously the ones that are critical or high priority are probably the ones that we want to address first because they have the largest impact on your customers typically. As you continue to kind of look through the list, you may start to see patterns in the list. You'll see things that are recurring over and over and repeat offenders. So once that kind of high priority, we start looking at those repeat offenders as probably the next place that we would try to focus our attention, because you have a high level of impact and a low level usually of effort as part of those. Some of those things are as simple as maybe changing something that's on a template. So a lot of the pages that we see with clients, they have templated pages with the header or the global navigation is on every single screen. And there may be an issue with the global navigation, but it gets repeated over and over and over on every page that the report picked up. Making a small change to the template sometimes can have a trickle down effect where one change solves multiple issues in one fell swoop. So those are the types of things we try to look for as far as kind of, easy wins, as we like to call them. The other area we try to focus on are things we call rinse and repeat. Those are things where, while it may not be a single template change that can trickle down, it may be the same impact or the same report on every single page or a series of pages. And what it allows you to do is make that change multiple times very consistently and very quickly. So it allows you to kind of change it on this page, make sure that it's working, change it on the next page, change it on the next page, change it on the next page. And you're doing basically the same work on all those pages. So you kind of get into a flow where you can typically get through those very quickly. These are often quick to address and they have kind of a lower level of effort to complete. We're not talking about something that's super complex on multiple pages. If it's super complex, we may want to think about that. But if these are some small things like color changes and those types of things, these are easy to pick up very, very quickly. And as always, we encourage you to kind of take ownership in this process. These are some things that work for us, but you need to decide what works for your company and what you feel are the right ones to address immediately in the immediate future, and maybe some things that can wait until a little bit further down. So some of the things to note when you're reviewing the list of issues is, how do we solve those issues? We found that solutions typically fall into one of three main categories when you're trying to solve some of these issues. The first is the code itself, right? So there may be a code change, as Dana mentioned. Things like the color has to change because the contrast is not correct. The tab order is not, correct. Those types of things. Those are some primary examples. Sometimes there are things we change inside of the UI where you can see it directly, and some things, as we mentioned, are in the background. So it could be a code change as simple as adding the alt text or adding those different things. So all of those are considered kind of the code change and something you can do with your development team in-house. The second thing we typically see are where there is an issue with the technology or the stack that you're currently using, and it requires maybe either an update to the technology that you're using, or maybe the system or the technology you're using is antiquated and there isn't the availability to do the upgrade or to be compliant with the technology that's out there. In those cases, we'll help you work through, is there an upgrade available? Is there something similar? Is there another tool that maybe work better and allow you to be more compliant? So those are some things from an architectural standpoint we happen to see with customers who have older sites that are kind of, maybe you're looking for those upgrades. And then the last one is the third party. We see this a lot of times where people use plugins or third-party vendors to control some of their websites, and those will be marked as non-compliant. In some of those cases, we work with the vendors to see if there is a way to become compliant. Some of those times we look at ways to take that work in-house, and other times we look at other vendors who may be compliant out of the box. So some quick examples of those are like things like help desk, or help inside of a particular online help. So if there are things like that where you're using a third party that may not be compliant, those are some different areas. Again, the thing I'd urge you to be mindful of when you're making these large changes is to make sure how you understand how the impact is going to be to the visitors of your site. So these changes can drastically change the UI and the overall user experience. So employing a UI or UX expert to kind of help you navigate and successfully make those changes, and not only not have a negative, but often have a positive impact on the user experience as part of this accessibility change, we highly recommend you employ one of those. All right. Next, we'll kind of go on to slide 29. So as Doug may have mentioned quickly, by trade, I'm a project manager. So this is kind of where my lights kind of start going off. This is where I think a lot of people begin to take the missteps when it comes to actually executing on the project. you've got this great plan, you have this report of issues, we've analyzed them, we know which ones we're going to do, we have this plan of how we're going to do it, but now it's time to execute. And one of the things is making sure that you have a detailed plan, which is essential in my book for kind of achieving what your goals are. Sometimes even being more important is to kind of track what that plan is to make sure that your plan is on track and you're going to deliver with your expectations in mind. Many of you may have heard of the kind of the triple constraint as part of the project management. So that's budget, scope, and schedule. Very, very often, one or two of those become the primary focus of any project, and the other one or two may slip into the shadows a little bit. So you may focus on budget, you may focus on schedule, but the scope starts creeping up on you, or they start adding things to the scope and you don't realize it until it's too late. Other times, that you focus on the schedule and you focus on the budget, you focus on the schedule and the scope, but the budget becomes exploded because you've kind of taken on some additional things. So again, making sure that you're tracking that project from start to finish is essential as far as executing on what you agreed to kind of do. And then the last thing we talk a little bit about is the QA side of things. So we're making all these changes. What we want to do as part of this kind of implementation is that you're achieving the goals that you have set forward. So if it is something like contrast, if it is something like this tab order is correct, or that the screen reader is announcing things correctly, we can make all the code changes, but if they're not actually being reflected on the site or they're not working correctly, that can be a huge challenge. So just making some small changes like that, you want to make sure that you're actually getting the results that you're expecting. And then secondly, with the QA side of things, we want to make sure that the changes that you're making aren't breaking anything downstream. So just because we're making it accessible, we don't want to break something else on the site. And with our kind of QA focus, we make sure that not only are the things working as desired, but we didn't break anything in the meantime. And then the last slide, we talk about ongoing monitoring. So we've completed the project, we're successful, everything's working exactly how we thought it would. There's several reasons for ongoing monitoring. We've kind of talked about these earlier in the slides a little bit, and even throughout Dana's presentation as well. But are you taking a phased approach? Are you evaluating the changes? Are you netting the results you expect? So many of these things are, again, it's going to be an iterative process. You're going to make changes. People are going to update the site. People are going to bring on different technologies as well. So one of the things we talk about are there are always new standards and regulations. As Dana had mentioned, that 2.3 is on the way. Is this something that I need to be aware of or I need to be cognizant of? Right now, the regulation is 2.1. When does 2.2 become the norm and the regulated environment that I need to be compliant with? As we all know, sites are not static. So any changes you make over time, are impacting your ability to kind of maintain the level of accessibility you desire. And as always, we stress you continue to keep your team educated. Like I said, this has been educational for me as well. As we've gone through this process, even though we've done multiple over these times, it's constantly changing. The other thing I'll kind of stress a little bit before I kind of go into, I know we're running a little bit later on time than I was hoping, but I'll try to go through it very quickly, is technology is always changing. So as we kind of see like mobile's becoming more active, there's different things. So as tools become available to you and your clients, you'll need to kind of start thinking about how do I make those tools accessible for my clients. And then really, like I said, kind of finishing up these slides, I have a lot of information that we've kind of shared here. What we're here is we're here to help you on your journey. So whether it's consultative services that we provide, whether it's just helping you get started, whether it's a full service offering, what we're here is to make sure you achieve your goals. So, oops, screen just go black. You guys see that?
Yeah, you're
Yes.
back on now, Nick. Mhm.
Yeah,
Can you guys see it still?
Yep, you're now at case study. Mhm.
just going through.
Is it still in the slideshow?
Yes, no,
Yes,
go
it
back
is.
to the slideshow. Yeah,
All right, sorry about that.
there you go.
The screen just went black.
There you go.
All right, perfect.
There you go.
So I'll talk a little bit
Mhm.
about it. Sorry about that. So we've given you a lot of information. Like I said, we're here on your journey, whether it's consultative, whether it's helping you get started or full service offering. Ours is to kind of make sure that you achieve your goals. That's what we're here for. Starting with the planning phase, we can help you understand what level of compliance is best for you. We can help you set what a realistic timeline is. What is a realistic budget? Those are some things that maybe you just don't know. Through our partnership, we also offer comprehensive testing services, including, like we mentioned before, both automated and manual testing with detailed reports, proposed solutions. We help you understand those reports and what is the best kind of action to move forward. So like I said, I urge you guys to kind of utilize Level Access's 25 years of experience that they've been out there kind of helping and guiding organizations in accessibility, combined with the 27 years of experience in kind of design, development, project management, and testing to kind of help you fill the gaps where you need this to be filled. Real quickly, like I said, I'll kind of go through the case study. This is kind of an example of our typical client. It's a little bit more complex. So one of the clients that we work with, they're kind of a publisher of professional resources in the educational sector. They create, help teachers teach students. The group we worked with was primarily focused on reading development in grades kind of PK through 6. And they dealt heavily in the print materials with only kind of a minimal amount of information being shared online. So if I'm kind of dating myself, if anybody of you guys remember, there used to be CDs in the back of textbooks. It had information that helped you kind of understand what was in the text. Well, they used to provide those also for teachers in the teacher's manual. So there would be a CD in the back of the book that would let them know, like, these are some games to play with the students. These are some printouts that you can do. About 10 years ago, they decided probably sending CDs was not the best idea, and it wasn't the best on the environment either. So they actually took the CDs and put those resources online. Now, those resources are only for the teachers. No students logged in. It was just kind of some very informational kind of information that they put out there. So they built this web app. It was kind of medium complexity because you had to keep all the school districts kind of separate. It was definitely proprietary information. So we want to make sure they couldn't print they could print certain things, but they couldn't print other things. And there was a lot of kind of complexities there. Then COVID happened, and it pushed kind of organizations to think about, from the educational side, of how do I make these resources that I have now that are in print available to students. So think about like little books or those types of things that now they have to make those available to students. And we have to do this very quickly because when COVID happened, the change from in person to online happened very, very quickly. The good thing was that they were already WCAG 2.0 AA compliant. That was a goal of theirs. They decided, as part of this kind of engagement, is we need to serve our clients better and make sure that we have the most up-to-date accessibility. At the time, 2.1 AA was the newest and latest and greatest that was out there. So they thought it wouldn't be a huge lift to go from the 2.0 to 2.1. And as I kind of mentioned before, what they found was, even on this, smaller site with medium level complexity, there were over 80 areas that were not compliant when they moved to the 2.1 compliance. So they had limited resources. This wasn't their only group that was kind of dealing with this. So what they did was, we kind of engaged with 5-Star to kind of help them through this process. This was a huge and high priority from the organizational standpoint. And we developed a very detailed plan to bring them up to 2.1 compliance. The goal was not to do it all at once. There was just no possible way with the timelines and those types of things. It was going to be a phased approach. What we did is we took those lists, we found what are the most impactful to their clients, and we worked through that list and began execution of that plan. It was more of a all hands on deck from our side because time was of the essence. These students were sitting at home with no resources available to them. We're also kind of their vendor of choice for custom development. So not only were we updating existing material, those teacher resources we talked about, but we were also trying to figure out a way to bring all those resources online as well while making them accessible. So think about books, think about reading the books, even some of their games that they were playing with a paper based are now being played online. How do we provide those and provide them in a way that's accessible to all their students? Again, this wasn't something we did overnight. We took the highest priorities and worked through those. We've been continue to work through those over the last 3 to 4 years. And as of right now, what we're seeing is, and what they're also seeing is, most of the RFPs from their school districts, as you mentioned in higher ed and those types of things, it's a requirement now. It's in their RFPs, are you 2.1 compliant? Our client is able to say, not fully, but this is what we've done over the last 3 years, and this is the plan that we have in place to kind of bridge the gap of those couple areas where we may not be compliant yet. And that's light years ahead of a lot of their competitors who are kind of lagging. And last thing to kind of wrap this up is they're still engaged with Level Access to this day. They do ongoing monitoring with them. We're still engaged with them to this day. We do custom development. We're also doing some of the WCAG enhancements literally next week. So it's an ongoing process. It's something that they made a priority. And if you make it a priority, we're here to help you kind of work through that journey as well. Now, I'll kind of turn it back over. I know that was a little bit long-winded, but hopefully we have a little bit of time to answer any questions that may have come up in the process.
Yeah, Nick, thank you so much for that presentation. And Dana, thank you as well for going over the higher level WCAG, areas. And we do have a couple questions in the chat, and I want to be able to address those because I know we're running up on the 2 o'clock time slot, and we want to be respectful of everybody's time. So we had a great question from Blake, and he said, just said quickly, great presentation, very informative. And when creating alt text for images, are there any guiding principles that you follow? And he has a follow-on question as well. Or are there AI-based tools that we can use? So I guess it's guiding principles around alt text images, and then how AI can be used for that, and maybe even just address whether or not AI is being used in, improving accessibility for websites as well. So I guess,
Sure.
Dana or Nick, if you want to touch on those questions, or both of you. So Dana, you can go first.
I'll take it first. So first, great question. So the guidelines for alt text and images is that the alt text should be meaningful and descriptive, but also concise. That you should figure out how to describe the image, but not in 6 paragraphs. And one thing I do want to call out is that sometimes people use alt text for SEO. And so while there is definitely SEO benefits from alt text, because that is something that things like Google do crawl and index, it is important that the alt text actually means something. So it's not just a jumble of keywords that don't mean anything to the user. Screen reader users rely on that alt text. So meaningful, descriptive, but concise is the guiding principle. And around AI. So there's definitely ways to use AI to support you in your efforts with alt text. Now, there are some platforms and tools out there that do this specifically, and depending on the content management system you're on, they have some API integrations, and that is generally where you would manage alt text at the content management level. One that comes to mind is a site called alttext.ai, and they do a decent job. Now, also sort of new, hot off the press is Level Access recently acquired a company called Userway. And part of Userway's tech stack is some AI alt text functionality. So I won't get too much into that right now, but that's something that is less on the content management side and more on the front end side. So there's definitely ways to leverage AI to support some of your alt text efforts. But yeah, that's a great question. Nick, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you covered everything very thoroughly. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I can be long-winded.
No problem. So a couple other questions that we have. So in one of the presentations was talked about third-party add-ons or third-party vendors, or I guess integration solutions that would go onto the website. How do you evaluate a third-party application or a vendor to make sure that they have the WCAG experience or they're certified in that area.
Sure. Do you want me to
Go
take
ahead,
that?
Dana. Yep.
Okay. So the first thing to do when you're thinking about working with a third party that's a product company is ask them if they have a VPAT. And that is a record of currently where they are within their accessibility journey, and the things that are accessible, partially accessible, or not accessible. So that's something that you can always ask when you're thinking of working with a third party is, do they have a VPAT available that they can share with you?
Yeah, and I think we've worked with multiple vendors who have been within compliance. So typically we have a list of preferred vendors that we work with depending on the technology that you're looking at. But if you have any questions, we can always help you with that process as well.
Sounds good. Appreciate that. Thank you. Can you recommend any best practices for e-commerce applications in terms of accessibility? Dana or Nick, do you
I
want
have
to
more,
tackle
I
that?
have more questions on that question. Well, e-commerce platforms have varying degrees of inherent accessibility. Some are better than others. So again, I kind of go back to that VPAT. Also, I can always say, find out if they're a level access customer. We work with a lot of them, and that's usually a good indicator whether they're prioritizing accessibility. But that's the e-commerce platform that you choose will have a very strong influence on the ultimate accessibility of your website and how much work the 5-star team might have to do to do workarounds. So I think it kind of goes similar to the previous question is lean on 5-star for their guidance as to, what their preferred list is for e-commerce platforms based on accessibility.
Sounds good. Nick, is there anything else you want to add to that?
I don't. I know that there's about 2 minutes left. I just want to make you aware of that as well. If there's any
Yeah,
kind
sure.
of follow-up.
I know that. Yeah.
Any other questions?
We have a couple of additional questions that I think are coming through the chat right now. I know we want to be respectful of everybody's time. Maybe Dana, if you can go to the next slide. Just want to be able to show everybody our contact information. And if anyone has any questions in regards to the presentations today, please reach out to me. You can see my contact information there. We did want to provide, Level Access's website, our 5-star development website as well. So if you want to be able to do some additional due diligence, some more research to get a better understanding of WCAG compliance and sort of how it impacts your website, please take a look at those sites as well. There's a ton of information there that's available that should help you get a real good understanding of some next steps that you want to be able to take. Again, a summary of today's presentation will be sent to you. I'm going to be able to provide you with a recorded link. And we're also going to be providing a sort of a recap of notes from today's meeting, just kind of touching on some of the high points of the presentations today so you can get a good understanding of the information that we've provided. Nick or Dana, are there any last comments that you want to be able to make before we're able to wrap up the presentation?
Not a ton. I just want to thank everyone for their time. I know there's a ton of information. Just let you know that we are here to help. Again, it's not something where you have to use us to do everything or you have to use us to do anything. We're basically here to help guide your journey. So if there are questions we can answer or services we can provide, we'd be happy to let just please let Doug know, and we'd be happy to help you.
Great. And I would just like to, just thank you for having me, and thank you to Doug and Nick and the whole 5-star team for being a great partner at Level Access. We really love when there are other accessibility champions that we work with, and just thanks again for being a great partner.
Yep, sounds good. And again, I appreciate both the speakers today, Dana and Nick. They really put a lot of time into working this into their schedule. A lot of meetings back and forth, trying to make sure that we got the right content delivered to you. And again, we will be making sure that we provide you with the recorded link so you can take a look at this at your earliest convenience, whatever kind of fits into your schedule. And again, please let us know if you have any questions. We'll be happy to follow up with you and guide you in the right direction. So again, everybody, thank you so much for taking time today to listen to the presentation today, and want to wish everyone a wonderful afternoon. So thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.